Hey there, biology students. Today we will do an abbreviated Chapter 4 lesson. Abbreviated because I am overlooking the first section of Chapter 4 just for time constraints. The end of the year is sneaking up on us, and I guess with that brings up a lot of excitement, but also confusion, and maybe even some relief, and all kinds of emotions with this strange quarter four. So we will cut out section 1, just do 2 sections here. So section 2 is called Niches and Community Interactions. And a niche, kind of a neat word there. Sometimes you'll see this word pronounced niche. To me, that sounds too much like a fancy breakfast item called quiche. So I use niche. Okay, I'm not a fancy language person here, but a niche is everything about an organism. So this includes where it lives. For your comparison, it'd be like your address. Okay, habitat, the organism's occupation, their job, their biotic and abiotic interaction. So every other living thing that they interact with, but also the non-living things they interact with. And also its resources. Okay, think about what you need to survive. Living things in the wild basically need similar things to survive, right? They need water, they need food, they need light, they need space, they need an area to raise their offspring. And basically what it comes down to is it's impossible for 2 different species to occupy the exact same niche. Okay. Not 2 individuals, but 2 different species. And here's why. If you get 2 different species that do occupy the same niche, then we get into what we call competition. And competition is a competition or a competing for resources. And it can be intra-specific or inter-specific. And those words dwell into the meaning of species. Okay, so if it's we're talking between 2 species. So maybe I'll give you, let's say we had a bobcat and a badger. Okay, if they were to compete for the same resource, they could be in competition, or it could be intra-specific. Okay, within one species. Okay, 2 badgers competing for the same food source or same space. And what we have is the competitive exclusion principle, which means no 2 species can occupy the same niche. If they do, and they occupy the same niche, the same habitat, and at the same time, one would die out. Okay, they both can't have the expected or proper resources. One could potentially or will potentially die out. And so what we see in nature is a division of resources. Okay, and this really comes down to evolution and what has happened throughout history. So right here, and this is actually something I was discussing with my family here a couple days ago. I was hanging a few birdhouses in the trees, and I was theorizing and trying to do some research on the height I should put them at for particular type of bird. I was looking at black-capped chickadees, and my wife said, does it matter what height it is? And it kind of does, because throughout evolution, these different birds, for instance, have, through competitive exclusion and niches, have preferred nesting sites and feeding sites, perching sites, and all of these things, which we tend to overlook. We just think of them as birds in trees, right? But look at this. These warblers here, to us, might just look like different colored birds, or maybe have some different markings or different noises they make. But they are 3 different kinds of warblers: the Cape May, the bay-breasted, and the myrtle. And notice how each one occupies a different part of a tree. So these could easily live in, well, maybe not easily, but they could exist in the same habitat, the same forest, and even maybe the same type of tree, but because they feed the outer edges for this one and the medium interior here and the lower boughs of the tree, we see that they can exist together. So it's not like these birds have a big bird meeting and say, okay, you're going to feed here, you're going to feed here. It's just the way it's worked out through evolution. So kind of cool. This is the part of ecology that I think is really interesting and fun to investigate and even maybe think about how long that took, you know. All right, next we're going to get into some interaction type things. Predator and prey. This is a interaction in which one animal captures and feeds on another animal. Okay, so this isn't a tough one to understand. Right there, that's an osprey. I know we referenced osprey the other day with trophic levels, but there is one. Notice how it's grabbing that rainbow trout right out of the lake. Okay, looking for danger at the same time. Its feet are actually adapted to grabbing fish. If you've ever grabbed a fish out of water, you know how hard that is, right? Here we have a grizzly bear opening his mouth to catch, I think, some sort of salmon. Not too sure there, but as the fish are migrating upstream to lay their eggs and to breed, spawn, bears know where to find them, right? Some luck involved there to catch it in your mouth. And here we have a barn owl feeding on a mouse. Okay, so all of these are examples of predators and preys. 3 predator, 3 preys. We also have what's called herbivory. Okay, an interaction in which an animal feeds on producers or plants. So here we have a caterpillar. If you know your stuff, this is a monarch caterpillar. We'll turn it into an orange and black monarch butterfly. Here we have a bison grazing on the prairie. And here we have a few deer browsing for leaves and buds on trees. So this is called herbivory. Okay. Then we'll also look today at a couple types of symbioses, relationships in which 2 species live closely together. Okay, so we talked about competition, but creatures can find ways to exist in the same area together. And these 3 kinds are called mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. And they're pretty easy to understand. Mutualism, if you ever have a mutual agreement with a friend, that's where each of you kind of agrees and works together in a way, right? So this is not unlike that. Both species will benefit from the interaction. Okay, and if you've ever seen Finding Nemo, then you probably have a good understanding of this, or at least an understanding of how to properly say the word anemone, right? So a clownfish hides in the stinging tentacles of the anemone, and it benefits from that for protection purposes. Okay, but also clownfish are rather aggressive, and so they chase off fish that actually can eat the anemone. I think I said it wrong, and get stung. So in a way, the anemone benefits from the clownfish, and the clownfish also benefits from the anemone. There we go. Parasitism. Yay. Everyone likes parasites, right? A relationship in which one organism lives inside or on another organism and actually does harm it, but typically doesn't kill the host because the parasite is dependent upon the host. Although there are some parasites that will kill their hosts. So let's look at a few parasites here. The wood tick. I haven't got a wood tick yet, but should happen pretty soon. They're active this time of year. They're starting to become active. Okay. Some people get real paranoid about ticks. How about a leech? Okay. Use it for fishing bait, but a leech is an aquatic parasite. And a mosquito. Now, not saying that these parasites can't harbor other parasites within them that can actually cause some real bad trouble to you. But typically they don't, the intent isn't to kill a host. Otherwise the parasite doesn't gain anything, if that makes sense. And then we have commensalism. Commensalism is where one benefits and the other really isn't affected at all. And here we have barnacles living on a sea turtle. Perfect example of the barnacle getting a free ride and able to filter out its food from the water. The turtle, really, it doesn't really affect it. I mean, I suppose it could if there was thousands of them, but typically we don't see a negative effect. All right, then we got to get through succession here. I got to hurry. Ecological succession are predictable changes that occur in a community over time, perhaps after a natural disaster or disturbance. A community here, we're not talking about a town like Larimore or something. We're talking about different populations that live together in an area. So all the plants and animals in a defined area are a community. So we have two kinds of succession. We have primary and secondary. And think about the numbers. Primary means 1 or first. Secondary means number 2 or second. So primary is succession that begins in an area with no remnants of an older community. Okay, we have no life base basically. So maybe a glacier came through and scraped the land, like happened to our Red River Valley at one point. Maybe a volcano came in and totally wiped out everything with its lava. So first we'll have what's called pioneer species, just like pioneer people that came into areas. Lichens and grasses, very small height plants, okay? And then secondary succession is when we have a disturbance that affects a community but doesn't completely destroy the life base, okay? The soil is intact. There may even be some plant life and animal life that's somewhat intact, which helps speed things along. So let's take a look at this here. Here's primary succession. So if you ever wondered how, an island, for instance, how does it have these trees and things? Well, at one point, it was bare rock, okay? And then lichens, small plant-like creatures that stick to rocks come in, and we have a lot of erosion things that occur, physical and chemical breakdown of the rocks, which actually produces a soil base. You can see that soil base gradually thicken here, and then over time we get taller and more substantial plant life and animal life, okay, intermediate species, and what's called a climax community, which has our oak and our hickory trees, our big strong hardwood trees. But this takes thousands or even maybe millions of years, okay? So this is like a section of land. It goes from this to this to this to that. Here's another view of it, okay? So we're not just panoramic looking here along the picture. This is the actual, this changes to that, changes to that, changes to that. And we get a thickening of the soil base, okay? If you dig down in your yard, dirt, 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 until you hit what we call bedrock. But in some areas, maybe there is no soil. It's just pure rock, okay? The plants actually assist along with the weathering to break down and make cracks in the rock with their roots to allow for these things to occur. Hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Secondary, like in the case of a forest fire, we have a fire come in, takes out the trees, but we also know that there's a layer of ash there, which is a tremendous nutrient source. And so these things happen faster. So we could have a forest fire come through, and 2 or 3 generations from now, your grandkids could be seeing the forest and hardly any sign of a fire. Okay, grasslands and prairie fires, great example of succession. Think about which type it is. And then if you guys could go take the Chapter 4 quiz, that would be great. And we will touch base next week. All right, thank you. Have a good weekend.